Hello, welcome to another video by LSX Engines, Tuning, and Marine. In this video I'm going to recap this project and explain the things, not necessarily the things I did wrong, but it was a breakdown in the process, not necessarily individual things, but the process had flaws, and it caused me to be this boat is 3 weeks behind schedule being delivered back to the owner. So I just wanted to recap and explain what I did wrong as far as the methodology and process, so that you might not make the same mistakes. So for starters, when I was trying to when I put the motor back in, one of the I guess key concepts of a marine engine is that you must install the outdrive, slide it into the back of the engine for the water pump, so that you can pump water up through this engine using water muffs. And in the process of putting that outdrive on, you have to do what's called alignment. And there's a special tool. It's a heavy steel rod, heavy steel bar that you slide into the back of the engine, and if everything's aligned, it slides in smoothly. If it's not aligned, it doesn't go in very smoothly at all. So honestly, I worked 3 days on this engine. 2 days after work, and then one whole Saturday trying to get this engine aligned, and I never could really get it aligned right. I ended up pulling it back out, putting it in and pulling it out 3 times, trying to figure out what was wrong. And I finally just had to sit down and study what the problem was, and think through it from an engineering standpoint, and analyze what could possibly be wrong. And what I concluded was that the back of the engine is located by the engine mounts, and it can't really slide laterally side to side. And there shouldn't be any twisting clockwise or counterclockwise relative to where the engine sits. So really the only adjustment on this engine is the front to be tilted up or down. And once I realized that and could tell that it was slightly off, let me back up. I use a wooden dowel to kind of get me started, get the alignment close. I've got another video where I talk about that, and I'll put that in the description of this video. But the wooden dowel helps you figure out, get you in the ballpark of being aligned, and then use the steel rod to finish it off. But I finally realized that there must be something wrong with the coupler on the back of this engine. And sure enough, when I swapped couplers to a different coupler, I had it aligned within the hour. So the lesson learned was that I should have realized it was the coupler right off from the start within the first hour and replaced it. Having said that, next time I'll know. But that was one issue. Then once I did get it aligned and I installed the outdrive, it had about a ½ inch, probably 3/4 to a ½ inch from being completely on. And instead of figuring out why it won't keep going, I just pushed harder. I just pushed as hard as I could with my body, and I pushed it on. Well, I didn't realize it, but the transmission linkage was no longer aligned. And when I did that, I shoved the upper transmission shaft up higher into the gimbal, and it would no longer engage with the transmission properly, or no longer engage with the lower shaft. And I have a series of videos on that too. It's called Shift Shaft Shift, if you want to look at that. But the bottom line is that when it didn't go on, I should have stopped, checked it out, see why it won't go on, and I maybe would have found the misaligned transmission then. That mistake cost me 2 days trying to figure that out. Then finally, when I got the outdrive back on and ready to start the motor, it wouldn't start very well. I'd spent a whole Saturday afternoon trying to get it to start, and it just did not want to start no matter what I did. And the flaw in that process was I was trying to start it without really checking spark or checking carburation, or I tried to just put it all together and start it without doing things one at a time. So the methodology should have been, get your spark right first. In other words, in the video, in my series on Thunderbolt ignition replacement, I talk about you can set the timing without actually running the motor. You can set it just by cranking it over the starter. That's what I should have done. I should never have hooked up the fuel pump. I should not have hooked up the carburetor. I should have got the ignition in the ballpark with the timing light before I ever tried to start it. I didn't do that. I was kind of in a rush. So, and what happened was that I was focusing on the ignition. Why wouldn't it start from the ignition? And my son yelled at me and pointed out that the carburetor was just like dumping fuel. There was like a almost a water fountain of gasoline spraying up out of the float bowl of this carburetor down into the carburetor. I'm assuming probably a good anywhere from a quart to a half a gallon of gas got dumped into this engine. So once I saw that and realized, I mean, it had standing gasoline flowing out of the top of the carburetor. That's how much gas was in it. And there's nothing I could do except just let it keep on draining down into the engine. And then once it did that, there's nothing I could do except let it drain out that night. I didn't want to pull the plug, so I didn't want to dump gas all down into the build. So I just stopped what I was doing and let it drain out, let the gas drain down through the cylinders and drain, excuse me, drain into the oil pan, into the brand new oil I had in there. And then I drained the oil the next morning. Actually, I think I started draining the oil that night and let it drain out all night long. And once all the oil was out, I then poured in 5 new quarts of oil. So anyway, the bottom line is that since I was focused on spark, I wasn't paying attention to the carburetor, and the carburetor was overflowing gas. And that cost me half a day's time. So had I had the ignition working, I would have not been so much focused on ignition. I would have been maybe looking at carburation. I don't know. I just know that the process was flawed in trying to do everything all at one time. Anytime you're trying to troubleshoot something, and when you start a new engine for the very first time, you're basically troubleshooting. You're trying to see all systems, trying to make sure all systems are good, and you test each system, or you should test each system one at a time before you actually try to fire it up. So I didn't do that, and that cost me. So I just wanted to, let me see if there's anything else I can recap. Oh, and then once I finally did get it started, it just didn't, it did start, but it was, it took perfect timing. I had to get the timing right on the money, adjusted. And I just kind of, as far as the carburetor goes, I just wrapped it with the handle of a hammer a few times, and it seemed the float bowl, there's a float needle in there, or excuse me, a needle valve in there that's operated by a float, and it was stuck. So by just tapping on the carburetor, sometimes you can free that up, and that's what happened. So the carburetor became unstuck. So anyway, as I was saying, the ignition was very weak, and this engine was very hard to start. Once I did get it started, it just had a very rough feel to it, and a very it just wasn't a smooth running motor. And so I put this ignition tester on it, and to see how strong the spark was. And from my experience, I worked on other ignitions with similar testers, and they would jump a gap almost a half an inch, and this one would barely get to a quarter of an inch before it would stop running, or before it wouldn't start. So I decided that something may be something wrong with the ignition module. So I contacted the owner and told him that, and he agreed to go ahead and do what's called a back up. Another influencing factor in the decision was that the Thunderbolt ignition modules from Mercruiser are no longer available. You can't buy them brand new, so you're at the mercy of eBay or Craigslist or maybe Facebook Marketplace to buy a used module that you don't know the condition, and people know they're no longer available, so they're charging $400 or $500 for them. So I think that's crazy. So for $367, could have been done for $367, but this ended up costing $467 because you had to buy a temperature switch for another $100. But I upgraded the ignition to the Delco EST distributor, and that took an additional week because I ordered the systems, or I ordered the parts on Tuesday with the expectation they'll be shipped on Wednesday from Louisiana to arrive in Georgia by Friday, and they didn't arrive till the following Monday. I was the tracking said there was a tracking label created on Wednesday, and it sat on their dock Wednesday and Thursday before it was actually shipped on Friday night or Thursday night. So I lost 2 days somewhere in there. I don't know if it was UPS's fault or this company's fault, but I was disappointed with that company. You'll find out who the company, I'm not going to say any names, just you'll figure it out, but they need to get their shipping a little bit. I guess what I'm saying is they warned me ahead of time on their website that shipping was slow due to COVID or something of that nature, or I didn't get a warm and fuzzy that they gave a crap about shipping stuff on time. And I thought about shipping it, like 2-day air overnight or something, but if they're going to let it sit on the dock, it doesn't matter what you pay for it, they're not going to ship it in time. But bottom line is that it took longer than I expected, so that cost me almost a week, well, I'll say about 5 days worth of time waiting on that to get here. So once I put the ignition in, it's now running fine. Everything seems to be good. And so I just wanted to kind of recap what things that went wrong. One of the things that I think would help in this process of any marine inboard-outboard engine is to thinking along the terms of doing things methodically and one at a time. It would be nice to be able to run the engine in the boat before you hook up the outdrive. In other words, get the motor running good. For example, when I was trying to figure out why this thing wouldn't start, I thought, well, maybe I did something wrong with the engine. Maybe there's a valve not sealing. So I did a compression check. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do a compression check in a boat with the outdrive on, but it's kind of hard to turn over. The starter kind of sluggish, and I was having to move the engine by hand sometimes, and it was just hard to turn with that outdrive on there. So it would be nice to be able to run a marine engine without the outdrive on the back of it, and I figured out a way to do that, which I'll cover in another video in the future. But bottom line is I should have been more methodical in how I approached or how I completed this project, and next time I will do things more deliberately and in series, or in a step 1, step 2, step 3 fashion, so that I don't get ahead of myself and lose track of what's going on. So it's working now. Owner's coming to get this boat tomorrow, and thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next project.